Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Darrel Mitchell.
Good afternoon. Man, I tell you what, following Jamie is a blessing. So, I'm praying for you. Thank you for sharing your heart and for answering God's call. I think what you should know about me first is that I'm a person in long-term recovery from alcoholism and drug addiction. So for me, that means that about 10 and a half years now, I haven't found it necessary to pick up a drink or drug.
Thank you, Jesus.
And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Let me tell you a little bit about how I got to the place. And, Tyler, thank you for those kind words. And, it's great to see Lieutenant Governor Crouch here and Michelle. And I just met Donna, who I've known on Facebook for so long, my Aspire colleagues. So it's interesting, over the years, you see some of the same people at some of these events. So, Michelle, thank you for everything that you do. But let me tell you how I got here. I grew up in Peru, Indiana, about I was a couple hours from here, right? And things were relatively normal for me. I was a popular athlete, but one of the things that happened when I was 8 years old, I started experiencing chaos in my house. And my mother is a manic depressive, alcoholic and addict. And she was institutionalized several times, never under her own will, was always under the authority of the courts. And so there became this situation for me early where I became embarrassed, and then I became abused, and then I was abandoned at a certain point. And so there was this resentment and embarrassment and pain that I carried with me at all times. And so early in my life, I thought, and I had a brother that was in and out of prison, suffered from the same disease, and allegedly did some harm to some children. And I thought, I just can't wait to get away from here and to escape all this nonsense. I just don't want to be like that. And the first time I got a hold of enough alcohol was the first time that I didn't have all those emotions and all those things pressing against me. And so that was nice. And I thought I could finally come out and play. And so I was 12 or 13 years old, and then that began a pattern of behavior and use that lasted for decades. So there came a certain point in my life where I said to my mom, after a series of things that I won't get into, that you're dead to me, and I don't want anything to do to you, with you any longer. And it was, I went to Purdue, and I left, in 1986, left the state, and started a family about half a dozen years after that. But I refused to let my mom come and see my kids, didn't want anything, as I said, to do with her. But my drug and alcohol use just continued to progress, but what was weird is I was succeeding in the world's eyes, so things were happening for me professionally and personally that I thought, this is what I need to do to get happy. I need to get honor among men, I need to get some cash, I need to drive a particular type of car. And if I can achieve those things, then this feeling that I have will go away. And plus, nobody knows that stuff that happened to me in Indiana and about that white trash family they used to talk about, and I'll be fine. Ironically, whatever I got was never enough. If I got the red car I wanted, I was like, I really probably need that in Burgundy. Nothing ever filled up that deal. And what was interesting is I went to parochial schools and was raised in a home that professed to be a Christian home, but yet there was all this chaos around me. So, there was, at one time I would have said I thought I was called to be a pastor and my relationship with God is the most important thing in my life. But what happened along the way is my use got worse. I got bitter at the church, and so I left the church. Well, the church is made up of people, right? And people are not perfect. So fast forward, I come back to Indiana. Things are going well professionally. Things are going terribly personally. and I get arrested for a DUI, and I always thought that I drove better when I was under the influence. And then I got arrested a second time shortly after that, and I was on a 3-day run, and I had been using for 3 days. It was January 3rd of 2014. It was that particular night was the coldest in that winter that we'd had, and the most snowfall. And I, as I said, was on this 3-day roll, and my daughter was home from Ball State and called, said, "Please just come home." And I said, okay, I'll come home, you know. And so as I go home, I must have passed out or browned out because I woke up to the sounds of sirens, and I could see the sirens in my rearview mirror. And I had drugs in the car, there was alcohol in the car, and I thought, oh man, you know, you get two DUIs within a certain period of time, it's a felony. And you know, I'm like, I'm gonna go to jail for a while this time. And I don't know if you can tell from there, but I use hair products. And jail is just not cool for me, you know, so, so what I didn't realize, and I had all this, you know, stuff in the car, I was close enough to my house, I thought, I'm gonna try to just get home and tell these police that I'm home and everything's fine. What I didn't realize at the time is that I ran the red light, I almost T-boned the police officer, I ran over the center line, and that's what caused him to whip around and cut his lights on. So as I pull up to my house, I see my kids in the picture window, but now there's additional cars coming because they think that I'm fleeing. And I thought, man, I don't know any of that. You know, I'm just like, I don't want my children to see me get arrested. So as I pull up and I see them looking, my daughter turns and I can tell that she's upset and is crying. Thought I'd seen every look imaginable on a teenage boy's face, and yet he's in shock. And I thought I better get out and tell these guys that this is my family and I'm home. So as I get out, start walking towards them, somebody takes me down from the side, and I'm looking up, and for the first time, I have two thoughts together that had never been put together before. One, I thought regularly, which is I'd die for my kids. So you could have strapped me to a lie detector test and said, would you give your life for your children? I would have said yes, and I would have passed, right? But the thought as that came through my mind and I looked at them, the thought that I also had was, but I just can't stop for them. So what's going on? That I'd give my life for my children, but I can't stop for my children. So I know I'm gonna go to get in some trouble. I contact an attorney and he says, hey, you probably ought to start attending some 12-step meetings because you're gonna have to. So I heard this thing, 90 and 90, you go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and I'm an overachiever. I would win, you know, the governor's race because I got tattoos everywhere. So moderation is not good for me. So I go to 120 meetings in 90 days. But the problem is that I care about what you think for me, but I'm not really interested in doing the things that are suggested in those rooms. So I become a spiritual thief. And if you say something in the room that is funny or profound, I memorize it, I file it away, and I wait till you're not in the meeting, and I'll repeat it. And so people see me at this club all the time, and they think that I'm doing great because I'm parroting back things that I hear. None of it is my experience. It's stuff that I've memorized. My family thinks I'm doing great because I haven't been drinking or using, so everybody's telling me how wonderful things are. But what I don't realize is that I'm dying from untreated addiction. And I'm not talking about just physical dependency. I'm talking about irritability and restlessness and discontentedness. I'm talking about isolation. And I'm convinced that it's not going to work for me. I knew that I was terminally unique and it's just not going to work. And so I began to contemplate suicide. And I'm a guy who, during active use or other parts of my life, I never ever considered suicide. But I'm like, I know I can't drink or drug again because I'm going to end up in prison, I'm going to kill somebody. But I can't imagine not. And so I'm stuck. I don't know why, but I go online and I start searching for some recovery workshop stuff, and I think what I'm going to try to do is get ahead of some of this stuff, because I've been picking and choosing what, you know, the steps for my pathway to recovery, you know, is the map, my pathway. God is my recovery, right? But my pathway that I chose was, I'm going to work the steps. But I was doing those like a salad bar, and you really can't do that. You know, half measures avail us nothing. And so I begin to listen to these tapes, and I hear about these sponsors that they refer to and the sponsorship lineage. And, they talk about a guy by the name of Don P. and another guy by the name of Gary B. And this Gary B. guy at the time had 50 years of sobriety. He's now got 60, which is pretty amazing. But I can't find him. But I'm sorry, I can't. The third tape, they say Gary B. from Indianapolis, and I start to go look for him, and I can't find him. I finally get hooked up with him, and he says a few things to me that are life-changing for me. The first thing he says is, I really wish you would quit giving your opinion about experiences you haven't had. Now let me say that again. Quit giving your opinion about experiences that you have not had. Because I'd sit in the rooms of recovery and I'd say, well, I've never made amends or written inventory, but he says, you don't have anything to offer anybody. It's just your opinion. It's a bunch of broken people giving one another their opinion. And I was sitting there and I was looking at this sign that says walk in recovery, walk denotes action. He says, if you want to tell us about recovery, I want you to do some things and then come back and tell us about your experience. That's what God's going to use. Right? So I begin to do some work with him. My life begins to change. I catch fire in recovery. I start volunteering in different places and get led to this field ultimately and where I spend my time now professionally. But what happens is he basically says to me, if you're just willing to do everything outlined in this book, then you'll never have to drink or drug again. I didn't understand that. Right? But what I've discovered, and I can give a practical example to you, and I love, you guys were having church there for a moment, is there's a time where, Jesus is with the 12 disciples, and they want to know who the greatest among them is going to be when he leaves, right? It's like, Master, who's the greatest among us? So here, is God, who has all of the mysteries of the universe at his disposal. And even for all those human guys that are following him, he didn't break it down to the lowest common denominator and say, well, the greatest among you is the most educated, or it's the wealthiest, or it's the bravest. But he said, the greatest among you is the one that would lay his life down for the other. And then he washed their feet. Right? So if you think about that, what God is saying to us is, you want to experience me? You want to love me? Love my kids. Be of service to one another.
Amen.
And what happens, I believe that there's these universal truths that have been laid into existence. It's like if I jumped off this roof, I would not invent gravity, I would just prove it. Right? So there's this thing, when I'm willing to be useful to you without anything being expected in return, I just want to be of service to you. There's a blessing that comes to me that fills up a part of me inside that all those other things that I thought could do that cannot. So I get to walk in recovery. Suzanne and I were talking earlier, and I said, if I could just get to where my feet are and be present there, because I can't do anything about the past. The guilt and the shame of the past, what am I going to do about that? Except stay tormented. And I can't predict the future. And actually, the big book of AA talks about lack of power being our dilemma. Well, where's the only place to find the power of God? This moment. This is the only moment you can access the power of God. It's the only place that we can experience him is this moment. Right? So what that gentleman showed me is if I was able to do some things and become useful to other people, then I would catch the buzz that I was always looking for. I would feel purpose. I would experience grace and compassion. And I would learn that what I've really been created for is to be in relationship with God and with you. And by doing that, I get okay with me. And what happened in that process is it's no longer on the menu for me to take a drink or a drug. I don't know how that works. I believe it's supernatural. But it's also not in the menu for me to say, let me go lay down on that busy road over there and see how long it takes before something runs over me. That's not a consideration of mine today. I'm not concerned about doing that. So that's been removed. I want to tell you this last story about my mom, and then I'll hand it off. So there's a part of the steps where you get to amends. And my mother died 10 years before I got sober, so about 20 years ago. And I was with her the night that she died, but we were never able to get any reconciliation in our relationship. And I was still in active youth, so what was I supposed to do? I'd seen professionals about this relationship and and the trauma and all those other things, and nothing had ever worked. But that gentleman I told you about that changed my life, my spiritual mentor, said, hey, if you can't see somebody, write him an honest letter. I said, she's buried. Write her a letter and go visit her grave. Well, I probably would have hopped around on one foot at that point and sang if he said, no, this is really what you need to do, because what I did is I submitted to him and said, I'll do the things that you suggest. So I go with my wife to Peru, to her gravesite, and I write this amends letter. It's really not the way I've been taught to make an amends. It's more about, I wouldn't have been this way had you not done this, had you not let this happen to me, if you had stopped the uncle from that behavior, if you had not left me, if you had not embarrassed me, on and on and on. And so when I was done, I didn't experience any peace at all. As a matter of fact, I thought, I don't know about this recovery thing. I think I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid. Like being at a sports game where you miss the play, but people are clapping, so you jump up and you look around and you go start clapping too, just because people are clapping. And my wife says, hey, we're here. Why don't you go and pray about it? And honestly, you guys, at that point, I'm like, why don't you go pray about it? I'm tired of people telling me to go pray about stuff. I was a little bit over it, really. And she said, no, honey, just go pray about it. So I thought, okay. So I go off and I'm like, Father, I don't know, how can we ever, what can happen with this? What's resolution around this? How am I ever going to experience peace for all those years of abuse and disappointment? And then for whatever reason, my mind begins to fade away, and I begin to start thinking about the club where I got sober, and somebody telling to me, when you see somebody here that's never been here before, go introduce yourself to them. Tell them this is where tell other beggars where there's bread. Tell them that you can show them a way to live that they don't have to drink and drug again. And so I see myself in my mind's eye giving these people hugs and saying, hey, welcome. Hey, man, I'm an alcoholic and you don't ever have to drink and drug again. And then all of a sudden I stop and I think, why am I thinking about myself? And I just get confused and I think, here's this self-centered deal again. I can't get anything right. This mother thing. And I don't know if my eyes are opened or closed, but I saw my mother as a young woman, beautiful, standing in the doorway of the club in my mind's eye. And there's a voice that's in my mind that's mine, but it's not my thoughts. So I believe it's God saying, what are you going to do? Are you going to welcome her in here? Because all those other people that I had just thought about and hugged, I don't know what they've done. I just knew that they were like me and they needed help. And this was before she was ravished by the disease of mental health disorders and addiction. She looked hopeful, beautiful. And that voice again, what are you going to do? Are you going to welcome her in here? For the first time in my life, I think, I remember experiencing and feeling compassion for her. Because I realized that she didn't have you. I began to think about never hearing her talk about God. And that was sad for me. And I realized that she did the very best that she could with the power that she had, which was just her own, and all those other things that had been a cause of trouble for her. And something shifted for me that day. And I left with peace that I'd never experienced before. Because I was willing to just take some action. Fast forward, my oldest sister, sent me this envelope of a bunch of photos and said, hey, I found a bunch of pictures that you probably have never seen. I've never seen them before. I think you'll like them. So I go looking through those photos, and great stuff, things I'd never seen, really neat memories. Something came up, I filed them back in my desk drawer, and I went off. And I was painting about 6 months after that, and I had to take a desk apart, and I see this folder, and I pull the folder out again. I start going through pictures. And I came across the picture of my mother wearing the very same thing that she had on in the doorway. The ruby red lipstick, a brooch, this beautiful thing around her neck. I'd never seen the photo before. And that same voice. I have been interested in every detail of your life. I love you, Darrel. So here's what I know. If I can remove the things that block me from the presence of God, all the selfishness and self-centeredness, the trauma, the depression, all the things that I can be treated for and helped with, I have an opportunity to experience this life-changing compassion and grace that is God's presence. And then I get to experience it by giving that away and feeling it returned. And coming to places like this where he says, hey man, where a couple of you are hanging out talking in my name, I'm there with you. And I get filled back up so that I can go back into the place where people are lost and say, let me tell you about my brokenness. Let me tell you about my pain. Let me tell you about my story. You aren't alone. You have an opportunity to do things differently. And all those things that during my life that were really the things that caused me pain, that led me to incarceration, that led me to near ruin, that broke up families, that allowed, caused harm to other people. All those things today, in the hands of God, through the process of recovery, are my greatest assets.
Amen.
So, don't give up for those people that you love that still need to hear that they don't have to drink and drug again. There's a different way. I pray for all of you, the different things that you're doing. It's a pleasure to be here. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else telling you about the grace and the compassion that I've experienced in my life. And that recovery is by far the greatest buzz I've ever had. Thank you very much.
Amen.